Hey guys, so I just got my AirPads in for my XR, and what I do have is three actual other Kush products from TFL. So I have the Kush Low, the High, and the Wide. I've tried them all out for a varying number of miles, with a different preference for one of them. And I guess my application may be a little bit different than yours, because within my scope of application, I do include front concave. So that being said, kind of leading into it, front concave is kind of the new big next thing being hyped up on the GT. We've seen Future Motion mention that as one of the new things on it. And so I kind of also want to take the opportunity to talk about front concave and how I believe it's going to be implemented on the GT. So in terms of the three foot pads, the low is, in terms of concave, pretty shallow. I would almost say it's next to flat. There is some concave to it, but not a lot. I'll post a picture with comparisons as well. So this is the High. And there's, let me see if I can get it in here. You can definitely see the cup of the concave in here. And then with the Wide, you can see it's there. It looks like it's pretty significant and pretty deep, but in reality, it's really pretty similar to the High, and it's just deceptive, really, I think, more because it's a little bit wider and where the concave really starts. And I think that's really the biggest difference. If you compare the two side by side, I do want to point out that the Wide has a pretty different structure on the bottom. With the High, it's relatively flat, same with the Low, but here it's kind of molded in with a honeycomb to give it some of that structural rigidity. And I also think it makes it, more stiff than as if it was like a solid cast piece. So when I kind of mentioned that the shape of the concave is a little bit different with the High, the concave looks to be like it's truly more parabolic, I guess is the best way I can put it. It goes almost all the way into the center, and it still kind of has that gradual curve all the way across, even though as the sides it gets to become more. With the with the Wide, there's more of like a flat spot, okay? And then the concave kind of really comes in more towards the sides. So from about like here out, there's the concave that starts to increase in thickness. While the center kind of third stripe down here is relatively flat. So grabbing an AirPad and some of the stuff I don't care about, or I'm not gonna need, you can see that, like, I think it's really better of a comparison into the High, obviously, because that's what most people are going to compare it to, not necessarily a Wide. The concave shape, it kind of is deceptive as well, very much like the Wide, where it looks like it's got quite a bit. But kind of with the same thing on the Wide as well, is the concave really doesn't start out till it comes out to about the edges again, to about that third, whereas the center area is relatively flat. And so kind of to address that, based on, like, one of my more unique use cases with these foot pads is front concave. I've used all of them except obviously the AirPad. I haven't installed it on my board yet. I really like, I liked the the low, it's relatively flat, but I mean, it's if I guess if you're into trick riding, it would be ideal for you. And that's just because of its relatively flat. It's easier to kind of maintain the foot pressure on the board, and it's even, especially for like if you're jumping and leaving the board. So it's good for that, I think. I used the wide for a while, for maybe a month, 2 months. It's nice, but it's not the foot pad for me. And the concave is fine. The shape is fine. But to me, the biggest part of why I don't like the wide as much to the high isn't necessarily about the concave. It's about this extra width that you get in the foot pad. And it just happens to be that when I ride and I place my foot, it's along the edge, or what would be the edge of the top of the Kush high. But when using the wide, the edge that I'm looking for doesn't exist. I would need to move my foot out further, and then to me it became a little bit more unstable, and not as comfortable of a foot position to ride. So it was harder for me to index my foot comfortably to put it in the same location that I would have put it for my Kush high. So, like, to me, that's why I prefer the Kush high as front foot pad. But that's just me. Maybe if you have larger feet, you would prefer the Kush high or the wide as your foot pad of choice. So, having kind of gotten into the kind of talk a little bit more in detail about the Craft Ride Air Pad. For parts of it, it does seem a little thicker. It's and then the wide or the high. But what's really unique to me about this is that it's construction. We know that on the inside it's got this metal frame, which is a good thing, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But it does have a softer, I don't know what you want to call it. It's made out of the softer material. That's kind of what necessitates the need for the frame. I would say it's softer than the high. I would say, like, I don't have a durometer, so I don't know how to necessarily measure it in comparison. But in terms of side by side, you can see visibly, I can indent the air pad, which is over here on the right, whereas where I can't really cause an indentation on the high. So I'm, I'm looking forward to using the air pad. I think it will definitely have a place in terms of, people wanting to use it, or in terms of, for it obviously being a concave foot pad. But I think from looking at it right now, I think it's probably a better foot pad to use, especially for front concave, than trying to use the high, potentially the wide. And I say this kind of like leading into the GT. I personally think that the GT foot pad, for the front foot pad, is going to use a pint sensor. It's going to be at least roughly in that same size, because from what we've seen over the years in terms of how other people have tried to do front concave solutions, is that they've used something like the low and put it on top of the foot pad. And one of the constraints with using the XR sensor is kind of obviously its size, but how does the sensor behave and respond to the concave? As we get more towards the edge of the board, there becomes more of a kick. And that's what's traditionally caused the problem. So the pint sensor, it being smaller, has eliminated that problem for a lot of people that I know that have used it. Now, so when we look at something like the high and the wide, we know that people haven't been able to as successfully use an XR sensor or even necessarily a pint sensor because of that concave still. But when we start looking at pads like the wide and the air pad, their their flat spot in the on the foot pad is a lot larger and a lot flatter than the other foot pads, like the high at least. So I think, if you're going to do a sensor with some significant concave on the foot pad, your best bet is probably to do a wide. I haven't done it personally because that's not how I do my front concave sensor setup. But I think that the way that the air pad is, from looking at it, with how large of the flat spot looks, I think it would be ideal, to obviously put a pint sensor here if you're going to do it. And the only real downside I see about the air pad is the Craft and Ride logo here. I'm not a huge fan of it. Like if I was to get another piece of grip tape, I would probably just cut it out or dremel it out, sand it down. But that's me. So like, and that's how I think that the GT front foot pad is going to work. It's going to be basically a pine sensor on top of, something with the concave amount of like an air pad. The larger flat spot, and it's going to be built out more with the concave out to the sides. It's not going to be as comfortable as, obviously an air pad or some other foot pad, because I expect that they would make it out of molded ABS plastic or whatever. It's not going to be made out of Kush material, like our aftermarket foot pads. And the reason that Future Motion is going to opt for this route is because they already have tons of pints in stock. They did the Pine X, and it's something that people have wanted, is front concave for the longest time. And it's, a way to, give you guys the product that you guys are looking for, without necessarily increasing an additional part that needs to be manufactured as well, by being able to use that same pint sensor. Is it going to have that fourth sheet of plastic? Probably. So it's still going to be insensitive in a sense, but at the same time, if they do use a concave profile like the air pad with the sensor in that, primarily center 2/3 area down the middle, I don't think it's going to be as bad as people make it out to be, the current sensor issues, because and I think this is also kind of a problem too, actually. I myself personally weigh more than most of the guys riding like pints and stuff, so I don't have that same sensor activation issue, because I can place more weight, more pressure, and impact a greater area of the sensor. But what you would have to realize, that I think people, and I know I do this, especially with the front concave, is that I put most of my weight along the edge. The pressure in the balls of my foot goes along the edge. So depending on how how far it extends out, that may be something to think about, is that you may want to look to, have the ball of your foot rest along, in here where that concave really kicks in, versus where you would normally put it on a flat. I think that's about it. So now, because I've been talking long enough, I am going to go and get my board and thunder off, change my foot pads. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys the quickest and basically the easiest, safest, grip tape change for a front foot pad. All I've done is loosen up the screws, obviously, with the foot pad, take off the front, grab your new one, slap together, and then install. Okay, so essentially I'm done. Obviously I've cheated in a sense, but this is my, for those that haven't seen it, front foot pad sensor on with what I kind of call the transplant method, the transplant deck. All it is a sheet of plastic, sheet of Kydex. I don't remember the thickness. You can check my Reddit post for that. But then it's, you know, it's one of the original 4209 XR foot pad sensors is what I've been using for like the last 2 years. Slapped on top of the smooth side of that piece of plastic. And then basically silicone around the edges. One of the biggest changes that I made last year was, instead of relying on silicone to silicone or whatever, we're trying to do some fancy suspension kind of method, bridging method to provide the clearance and gap to keep the pad from ghosting, is to use sorbethane. Basically you get a sheet, I think this is 70 durometer sorbethane. I don't remember the exact thickness, probably around like 1/8 of an inch. Cut into strips. I siliconed it down onto the sides and basically just went around with more silicone just to give it that seal on the front or around the foot pad. So let me plug this back in. Helps if I index it to the correct spot. Okay, so basically that's, having this as a separate item, where I don't have the sensor actually built in onto the top of the foot pad, is for me does like several things. Obviously it's let me switch out my foot pads very easily, but the other thing is, and one of the things that a lot of people are complaining in the community is, oh my gosh, Future Motion made my foot pad, my sensor, insensitive. Well, the problem with the sensor, the foot pad design, or this implementation on the foot pad, is that all that's there between your sensor breaking, your board ghosting, anything, is your grip tape and that sheet of plastic. So they added another sheet of plastic to make it thicker, so it reduces the chance that you ruin it. Obviously there's still going to be people that get into an issue that somehow cause issue with their sensor, but at least it makes it more durable, and I think that's honestly a good thing. Or obviously, and then the complaint kind of stems from maybe if you're a lighter rider or something along that line. And I think one of the things that we really need to address in terms of what we know collective knowledge-wise is, I already connected it. There's this dead spot, okay, on the sensor. So let me see it. And on the foot pad. And basically, if you're putting your foot just from, here all the way across, there's no sensor in this portion of the foot pad, okay? So you keep that in mind. Like, I know on Reddit, I will make the comment, your foot position might need some work. I probably don't really use such nice words sometimes, but that's the gist of it, is your foot position may need to move. When I get this, put it back on, and I test it before I start recording again, I'm going to show you one of the things that I do, how I've changed my mounting style in regards to my foot position, and it came about with working on this front foot pad, and I don't just step on the board anymore. It's a little bit different. and it takes into, and when I explain it, it'll kind of it takes into account, you know, body mechanics and immerse tape, not Loctite. So my biggest concern with the AirPad is, you know, in terms of using it on the front, is how does that ring, that you know, framework that they have that's all metal, how does that impact how I engage the front, the sensor when I step on and go to mount my board. So I'm going to do a couple of test runs just to make sure everything is how I like it, and then I will move the camera into my hallway for my storage room, and kind of then talk through how to change your mounting practice to better suit you know, footpad sensor engagement issues, and what may also need to be done coming up for the GTs with front concave. All right. Okay, so AirPads on front and rear. So basically a quick demonstration of what I hope to capture, you know, issues with wearing the worst possible footwear and front concave. The board is cold. It's been down here for like the last 2 days, so it's like 40-some degrees. So no idea how it's gonna go. Yeah. All right, so one thing I kind of want to address is when we talk about front foot pad sensor engagement, and yes, I realize I am using a Concave Kush high. Yeah. What we typically notice or we complain about, especially with new users, is it doesn't engage. It doesn't detect my foot. And one of the things we need to consider is how are we stepping onto the foot pad. And when I say stepping on, that's a very common mindset in terms of an action. We are kind of, you know, doing exactly that. We're stepping onto it. And the way that most people will step onto it is, you know, in a natural kind of body mechanics way, is they will start that step and press on process with the balls of their foot. So they do that, and then they don't always make contact, even though people will say, like, I am using my full foot. But, you know, that's just kind of the way we naturally translate the force and pressure when we step on, is to utilize the balls of our foot to step and then push it level. So, like when we step and then push on, oftentimes our heel is still, you know, very light. And what we need to realize is that in the front foot pad space, is that from about here, you know, forward of these screws that we'll see on the front foot pad as well, from here back, there's no sensor. It's a dead spot. So we actually have to go to about here and up to start engaging the sensor. So if you ride very close to the wheel like this, you may not actually be on, or at least engaging for the heel, your sensor. We'll kind of see this oftentimes too with kids, because they're just, not as big as, an adult size rider. Um, so one of the methods that, I've transitioned to, with testing and developing, my front concave solution with the transplant deck, is how do I engage my sensor consistently? And the way I've been doing that is by stepping on with my heel first and then rolling my foot onto the rest of the pad. So it starts with, a step on, press, start pressing with my heel, and then roll my foot onto the rest of the foot pad to engage that, surface so it's evenly. And then I, push down then. For me, it's, been very consistent and reliable, especially as, in my development process and iterations. One of the things I found or was trying to work on is how to better, prevent, or how to better, um, what's the word? How to better ensure consistent deactivation of my foot pad. And I had this issue really more in the cold temperatures. Trying different materials and different methods, by either adding material along this side for my heel, um, so that, it would push up against it, and then cause, the gap, um, and then disengage. So, as I was doing that, some were much more, cause mounting issues. I did get some mounting shames, because I did need to change the way I mounted. And that's what I found, was that if I started pushing with my heel first and then rolling my foot down onto the foot pad, I would be able to engage it versus stepping on with the balls of my feet and then pushing down as well. Um, so, like, that's kind of my tip, and kind of probably one of the best ways that, as a community and group of riders, we can address uh, mounting issues with engaging, so that we don't have to put, Velcro dots or, other strips of grip tape on top of our foot pad. I think it looks kind of ugly. I think it's more of a crutch, and I don't think we should rely on crutches, because then what happens if you have to, change foot pads in the future? Well, then you have to put the dots back on, and you're relying on those dots. Same with if you go to ride someone else's board. You may not be able to ride that board because you don't have good technique, or you don't have a technique that can work across, multiple boards. So that's why I encourage that, if you have foot pad issues and aren't able to consistently mount, to, try a different or better technique, or, along with, shifting your foot position. So make sure you're, engaging, the sensor where there's the sensor, obviously. Um, yeah. Okay. So I guess, like, now I want to talk about the foot pads, and between kind of the Kush high, I would show the air pad, but it's actually mounted on my board, front and rear. And I'm not going to go through the process of taking it off. I don't think there's one that's better than the other. I've ridden a few miles with the air pad, and I can't say that it's noticeably different in terms of a comfort perspective, front and rear. You know, the rear feels fine, it's unremarkable. But then I would say also, going to like the push wide, in between the high, front or sorry, in terms of a rear concave, I mean, I think it'll fit anyone. It's really more, I can't say one is better than the other because they feel the same to me. Um, I don't feel that the AirPad is better than the high. I don't feel that is better than the wide either. If I had to choose, if I was a new writer, had to recommend, like, whatever your budget affords. If you want, the craft and ride AirPad, go for it. If your budget can afford a few dollars more for the wide, get that. The wide only to me really makes sense. If you have a larger shoe size. Um, the concavity between them is all more or less the same. I don't notice a difference when I ride, especially for the rear. Any one of the three are a fine choice in terms of a rear footbed. Um, it's really more where you look into a front concave solution that there becomes a difference. Um, what I found in general, especially with my WTFs, is I have a harder time engaging consistently or feeling as comfortable engaging my board um, with the high and the wide. Um, I feel, or like what I've noticed, is that on the AirPad, I push, I step down, I push, and my activation is a one time thing. It it's been consistent so far in like the one or two times I've ridden the board. And whereas like on with the Kush lineup, what I've noticed is, I start my push, as it comes to level, I kind of overshoot and waffle a little bit. And I'm not sure where my engagement is going to be. Some of that I think may be attributable to the design and a little bit of the flex. At the same time, I think it could also just be myself and my knee issues. I'm not sure, because it's been like a week or two, since going from the high to the AirPad on the front. And I haven't ridden much due to the weather, either. And the only thing that I can say, I don't think it's a concavity that's different. The foot placement's the same. It's, to me, I think it may just be the design of the AirPad and how it has that metal reinforcement ring on the outer part of the footpad. And so maybe to me, based on the way that I have the transplant deck set up for myself, maybe like what I assume is that it's just resulting in a cleaner, more even surface engagement than maybe the Kush products provide, as they may be flexing a little bit. Um, and that's what I think. I think it's that frame in the AirPad that's giving it, a solid, consistent, whole foot pad down, and engage. And so it doesn't have to worry as much about, is there a little bit of pressure on the heel side that's not there on my toe side. So my toe side is a little bit lifted, let's say, as I, transition my step down, to bring the board level. Or so because I think it's a stiffer, more rigid product, in terms of a frame. I think it's, just being able to get that, consistent, activation. And I think that's the benefit of the AirPad. And it may be a better product, especially when you look at it as a front foot bed solution. Um, that said, I also believe that because of that framework, you may be able to get away with using a pint sensor on the bottom of an AirPad, with a lot less issues of ghosting, where you may not need to put, something on the side to shim it up, a little bit as well. Um, so I think there's great potential in the AirPad for front concave. So like, if I didn't have the solution I have now, I would probably try it. And it's kind of like the way the AirPad is constructed as is right now. Um, I would want and hope that Craft and Ride produces an AirPad with a similar design for the GT. Um, and even though Future Motion is shipping the GT out with the front concave footpad, it's not going to be as concave um, as an aftermarket Kush or AirPad that we see currently. I think it's going to be a lot less. I think it's going to actually be, having recently looked at some more pictures, um, the concave on the front is going to be a lot closer to a low. It's not going to be um, symmetrical in the sense that they take a rear foot pad with concave from the GT and slap that on the front. I don't think that's going to happen. So that definitely leaves open, you know, solutions from Craft and Ride TFL to make their own, and rear foot pads that will also still be better than Craft or Future Motions if you were to go through a process of converting a footpad into so that it's usable on the front. So I mean, I think there's still definitely a market, and then we also have to remember that Future Motion's footpads are going to be that waffly plastic construction. They're not going to be made out of some kind of polyurethane, squishable material that we have for the Kushes and the AirPads as well. So obviously, yeah, it will take some time for the aftermarket to create the footpads as well. And I know that before I get my GT, whenever I get around to ordering, actually, one of the things I will be doing is ordering footpads, sensors at least, to start working on building a front concave for it, to build a front transplant deck as well. So I'll have that ready for as soon as I get my GT and rear footpads as well.